Good morning for those in Washington, good afternoon for those in Europe, and good evening for those in Central Asia. My name is John Herbst. I run the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. We have an excellent event for you today on the recent border clashes between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, and we have a strong panel of deep area experts to go over this with us. And we have Dr. George Gavrilis, who's a fellow at the University of California, Berkeley Center for Democracy, Toleration, and Religion. Jonathan Hennick, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State at the Bureau of South and Central Asian Affairs at the U.S. Department of State. We have Akile Karimova, who's a Kyrgyz civil activist based in Osh. We have Dr. Jennifer Brick Murtazashvili. He's a non-resident senior fellow at our Eurasia Center, but also a professor at the University of Pittsburgh. And we have Anahita Saymidinova, who's a Dushanbe-based journalist for Iran International TV. Okay, the clashes between Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan surprised all of us in recent weeks. I have a map to briefly show this to show you the complexity of the border situation. And if we can put that map on the screen. Here you see the complexity of the border situation in Central Asia. You see how Uzbekistan sticks out a finger, the Ferghana Valley, deep into Kyrgyzstan. And then you see, besides that, you see several enclaves of Uzbekistan and Tajikistan inside Kyrgyzstan. The clashes that have taken place are around the Tajik enclave of Varukh, which you see on the map, lower center. With that, we're going to turn to our panelists and we can begin the conversation. So I'd like to first turn to Jennifer. If you could briefly, well, first let me say that since independence, since the Soviet Union fell apart, Central Asia has largely been stable, the absence of war. In fact, since the Tajik Civil War, which ended in the mid to late 90s, there's been general peace in Central Asia. Could you describe for us the clashes between the Tajik and Kyrgyz forces and its origins?
Sure, and thank you for the opportunity to be here. And I think before we get going, I just want to express condolences to many of our friends in Central Asia who are watching this here today. It's during Ramadan, and I know that this escalation has been shocking to so many of us. So I understand it's a difficult time, but the immediate trigger for this was a typical, unfortunately too typical kind of skirmish that happened around a water intake station on the Kyrgyz side of the border on April 28th. Now, the Tajiks say that they were on the Tajik side, and official reports from Kyrgyzstan said that Tajiks came onto the Kyrgyz side of the border. And the Tajiks were installing a video camera over a water intake point. And this water intake point feeds the entire Ferghana Valley, including Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. The event began as a typical skirmish that we've seen so many times over the past 15 years, physical altercation, stone throwings, and then this often leads to shootings with small weapons, usually hunting weapons. This conflict seemed to ebb, but then later that night, there was the beginning of a large-scale conflict. And the large-scale conflict was really a coordinated military offensive by the Tajik military along the border, which began entering Kyrgyzstan. And this response was really quite unprecedented, but came as a response to an increasingly provocative rhetoric coming out of Bishkek about solutions to this border conflict. The result of this clashes over 2 days resulted in 36 dead on the Kyrgyz side, 19 dead, at least according to official tallies on the Tajik side, and those killed were overwhelmingly civilians. This left hundreds of injured, the destruction of many homes and businesses and social infrastructure such as schools and police stations, and tens of thousands have been displaced. Tensions have intensified in recent years as the border has become increasingly securitized. There's been this sporadic conflict on the border. Even last year, several people were killed. The borders are messy because, as Ambassador Herbst noted, these borders were inherited from the Soviets, and during the Soviet period, these borders didn't have much significance. Over the past 20 years, however, these borders became more securitized, they became more official, and this increased tensions between communities. Now, these tensions usually dealt with individual interactions as they tried to cross borders, and as border posts were set up, individuals began to feel quite alienated by their treatment by security officials. But what changed recently? As many of you know, last year a new government came to power in Kyrgyzstan under the leadership of Sadir Japarov. And the government seems to have used a more heavy-handed approach in its rhetoric than in the past. And recall that all countries in the region have really struggled to deal with its minorities, and the Ferghana Valley has been really a flashpoint of this. And this flashpoint was really seen in Osh in 2010, where hundreds of ethnic Uzbeks were killed during fighting in the Ferghana Valley on the Kyrgyz side. So the government of Uzbekistan, which constitutes around 80% of the Ferghana Valley, came to historic agreement with the Japarov government about a month ago, a little bit over a month ago. And as a result of that, there seemed to be quite public backlash against this in Bishkek. And Kyrgyz authorities facing public resentment over this border agreement began to quietly renege on the agreement with Uzbekistan, saying that this was just the beginning of a border agreement. It wasn't completely finalized. But given the momentum behind these solutions, more questions began to be asked about the Tajik-Kyrgyz border and whether a similar solution could be found to this conflict. And this border region, the Kyrgyz-Tajik border, has seen much more violence than the Kyrgyz-Uzbek border in recent years. So the Kyrgyz official in charge of state security threw out a solution suggesting that Tajikistan would give up the Varukh enclave, which is Tajikistan's largest exclave or enclave in the Ferghana Valley, in exchange for other territories. Now, this territory is inhabited by ethnic Uzbeks. The intensification of this rhetoric seems to have led to a growing suspicion on the part of the Tajik population that Kyrgyzstan was going to act unilaterally. And this created a sort of security dilemma and uncertainty and fear among the local Tajik population. So President Rahman of Tajikistan made a very strong statement that Tajikistan would not support this annexation. And he even visited Varukh in April to try to soothe this tension. So it's really difficult to understand what triggered all of this. This particular event triggered this. But this rhetoric between leaders about finding a final solution to this border agreement and under context of this security dilemma really seems to have amped up rhetoric in recent weeks.
Jennifer, thank you very much. That was an excellent overview. All right. Akile, how is the conflict looked at in Kyrgyzstan?
Thank you very much for inviting me. It's such an honor for me to represent the voice of Kyrgyz civil society here. And to start the overview actually of this conflict, actually the Kyrgyz society, actually the Kyrgyz, not just the society, but the all over, not just in this country, but the all over the world never expected that this kind of border dispute would lead to such a bloodshed that actually rapidly escalated during these 2 weeks. So why I'm saying that we never expected, because before that, as Jennifer noted, we had many border disputes and conflicts. Just a year ago, right in May, in the end of May and beginning of June, we had a big conflict in Soh. This is the exclave of Uzbekistan in Kyrgyzstani territory. And unlike the situation in Varukh, the Soh conflict was immediately treated by the Kyrgyz and Uzbekistani government, where the Prime Minister Aripov from Uzbekistan, he immediately himself came down to Soh, as well as the Kyrgyzstani Prime Minister at that time. So what is the difference between that conflict and the conflict of Varukh in enclave and exclave is that so the government actually from both sides, they were pretty slow in treating the conflict immediately, so that so that prevent the this huge casualties we actually have. So this is the first thing. The next thing is that um, actually the conflict escalated from one point, from Baruch, Aksai, Kukterek, to another area, completely different area. And it located not in Batken Rayon, but in Leilek Rayon. So the conflict occurred in Varuch on 28th of April. It rapidly escalated on April 29th in Leilek, in completely different territory, where we again share the borders with Tajikistan. So again, in that area, we have witnessed largely using the military and shooting against the civilians during the daytime. And during the nighttime, we see from the many footages available from the Tajikistani segment of internet, we see that there were so many burning down of the houses, demolishing the social infrastructure. And on April 30th, we see the same thing. So these things actually they were accompanied during all these days. The government of Tajikistan and the government of Kyrgyzstan, they had several attempts to ceasefire, but all of those attempts were they were never I mean the both sides were never committing to those ceasefire, which led to even more violence. So if you see the numbers, I see Jennifer already reported about the numbers, but also I would like to note on the escalation of the conflict via the social media. So unlike all of the border conflicts we've had with Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, this border conflict was widely accompanied by the social media, which actually, brought even more anger and even more mobilization from both sides, and not just in Tajikistan, but also from Kyrgyzstan. So that's why we've had on central squares here in Bishkek of many men mobilized and asking for guns and arms to go to Batken. So those things are very, those things actually brought so much concern to Kyrgyz civil society. And that's why these attacks, they are not viewed just the border conflict. They're viewed as the well-planned attack that actually led to such great casualties we never had before. So I think I will stop here. But before I will go, I will answer further questions. I would like to say that the Kyrgyzstani civil society actually has a great concern that if this occurred, where's the guarantee that it will never happen again? With this large militarization and securization on the borderlines, we have great concern that it can happen again on those territories that are still under a great dispute from both sides. If so, we're not just concerned, but also we are looking for the decisive steps that would lead to file all of those military crimes, armed crimes, and to file and report that into international criminal court. Thank you.
Akale, thank you. I want to have a quick follow-up here. Would you say that social media had a role in stirring this up in ways it did not have in the Osh incidents from 2010?
I think it's a good question. Actually, I was thinking about that because, the social media was not just active before and during the conflict itself. The social media was even active and went viral with the footages of the allegedly Tajikistani army with the Tajikistani militia official, where we've seen from the footages the army was on the territory of Kyrgyzstan. And this footage went viral on May 2nd, when we've had no actually attacks and conflicts. So so here you can see the similarity with the social media widespread involvement into conflict with the June 2010.
Thank you. Okay, Anahita, your view from Tajikistan.
Um, Hello, everyone. Thank you for inviting me as well. So I just wanted to say, to come back what happened between our countries. Like in Dushanbe, no one expected as well. But our access to information was very limited, actually. I just traveled to that area on May 1st. But as you know, the incident started on April 28th. But just I want to say before what happened. When Kamchibek Tashiv, the head of GKNB of Kyrgyzstan, started to talk about to exchange voruh to
Excuse me,
some...
Anahita, could you tell the audience what the GNB is?
Yeah, it's the Committee on National Security.
Good,
It's
thank
the former KGB. So I noticed on Tajik segment of social media, when the Kamchibek Tashiyev speech was published, you can see, I saw a lot of active Tajik users on social media started to talk that Voruh, it's our territory. We don't want to exchange Voruh to some other Kyrgyz territories. After that, just to remind you what happened on March 30, as Jennifer noticed about this military exercises, and the Tajik side, like in Sud region, they didn't know about this upcoming military exercise. When I went to that area, I talked to people in the villages, and I asked what happened, because usually, as we know, like we had a lot such type of cases, mostly 150 cases before, but not at this scale. I know, because I feel sorry for Kyrgyz people who died. I mean, civilians, and from Tajik sides as well. Officially, we have 19 died and more than 87 people wounded. But just to explain you, I didn't expect that the border is so complicated there, because I've never been to that territory. And you can see one Kyrgyz house, like one Tajik house, and it's like a chess. You know, a lot of disputed territories, and people there, they were talking that in the springtime, we don't have access to water because the distribution of water is not fair. And sometimes they don't know like the land, how to use it. They go somewhere and it's apparently the Kyrgyz territory, and the locals from the Kyrgyz side, they are starting like throwing the stones to them. And when you want to go to Voruh, you should pass the Kyrgyz village. And every time such incidents happen, people are really like, locals are aggressive, and the people from Voruh, they are almost like 40,000 people. They are cut off from that road, and they don't have access to Isfara. So I think this conflict is really old. It's the bad Soviet legacy, as we know. But this time, I think from the Kyrgyz government, I mean, these provocative speeches just made it so bad. What else I wanted to say? Just one thing, that the lack of trust. When you go to these communities, I didn't have the chance to talk to Kyrgyz people, unfortunately. I would love to talk, but even today, my friend, he's a blogger, he went to that area. He said now it's really calm, and he wanted to talk to Kyrgyz locals, and they didn't want to talk. So it would be good to hear their views as well. Also, what we noticed during this conflict, that how our journalists, I mean the local one, they were not prepared to cover such a conflict situation. And that's why we didn't have, because from the Tajik side, we had also burnt houses, destroyed houses, but nobody reported about it till like May 2nd. But from the Kyrgyz side, we saw a lot of aggressive, um, when even I tweeted some Tajik houses, I saw a lot of negative comments from the Kyrgyz side. They were saying that it's a fake photos. You just took some photos from Kyrgyz villages and just published it. Um, there was some kind of coordinated attack on social media, and it wasn't helpful, I think.
Okay, thank you very much, Anahita. We've just heard two rather different views from the Kyrgyz and the Tajik side of this incident. George, you've got a background, I think, in peace building. The clash took place in, again, complex geography of the Ferghana Valley. There are reports now of ethnic cleansing in the area, although officials, both Tajik and Kyrgyz, have denied those reports. Is there, in fact, ethnic cleansing going on? And what are the prospects for escalation of this conflict?
Thank you, Ambassador. Everyone, it's a pleasure to be on this panel with you, although the occasion is very sad. The one optimistic thing I would say in response to your question, Ambassador, is that I would not use the term ethnic cleansing for the situation. There's certainly ethnic animosity. There is certainly a lot of distrust, but it's not just about ethnic tensions. There's also resource competition. Sometimes families from the same village from two different ethnicities dislike each other for other reasons other than ethnicity. So there's a lot that's going on here. So the good thing is that I think we should steer clear of labeling it ethnic cleansing and rejecting anyone else's claim to label it ethnic cleansing, if only because such a label increases the tension so much on the ground and in social media and among peacekeeping circles that I think it would be unhelpful. The one positive aspect to what we're seeing is that in terms of the continuum of border violence, if we look all around the world at other border conflicts, it's still very low in terms of the intensity and in terms of the amount of deaths, even though any death is really sad and unfortunate. So when you compare it to some of the violence that we saw along the borders of Yugoslavia in the 90s, or Kosovo, or Eritrea and Ethiopia, where the deaths were in the tens of thousands or many thousands, this is much lower. And it's still lower less if we look at what happened, let's say, along Tajikistan, Afghanistan's border in the 1990s, especially during the Civil War, where there was a lot of border violence, and you could probably add the deaths up to several hundreds. So this for me felt a little bit reminiscent of what we saw, for example, on Cyprus in the 1990s, when there were skirmishes between civilians on both sides that in some cases got armed, in some cases got militarized. The bigger question is the one about escalation and what the prospects are for this to escalate. And I see this in two ways. There's the short term, and I think the prospect for escalation is fairly low in the short term, because when you have incidents like this, if they don't immediately continue and escalate, it tends to get much quieter. My bigger concern is about the longer term. And I think the longer term is where we have a lot of potential for these kinds of conflicts to well up again and to cause even more violence and death than we saw. So we have to figure out how to solve this very, very productively. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Jonathan, representing the State Department. Are the parties negotiating, and has the U.S. been in touch with the parties?
Sorry, just need to get off mute. Well, thank you, Ambassador, and thank you for inviting me to join this panel. Let me begin, of course, by echoing what Jennifer and the other panelists have said, and that is to really express our deep condolences to the people who are affected by this tragedy. The loss of life, particularly civilian loss of life, on both sides is particularly troubling. And we shouldn't forget that many people remain homeless right now or displaced as a result of this conflict. We have, of course, been following it very, very closely, and we are encouraged to see now that the leadership in both Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan have been, I think, adhering to the ceasefire that they've negotiated. We know that early on in the conflict, the foreign ministers and the presidents, as well as the heads of the committees for national security, were in direct contact, which is encouraging. But at the same time, we really cannot take for granted that that the situation is resolved. It is not. It's going to require, I think, peace and stability to create the conditions for people to be able to return to their homes and for rebuilding to commence. And so we are in direct contact, of course, through our embassies in Bishkek and in Dushanbe with the leadership of both countries. We've been in touch with their embassies here in Washington. We have, offered in any way we can to support a peaceful resolution to this conflict, and more importantly, we have really urged the leadership here to take responsibility and to look forward at creating the conditions so that this type of thing doesn't happen again. I'm struck by some of the comments that the other panelists have made. I don't think it's helpful to really look backwards. I think really the important thing here is to look forward. As far as de-escalation, I am maybe admittedly naively, but somewhat optimistic. We've seen a lot of progress over the last couple of years among the governments of all 5 countries in Central Asia in terms of willingness to engage directly with one another, to resolve a number of issues which prevented cooperation and collaboration in the past. And we still see, I think, a real willingness to work cooperatively in the region, to make the region, to create the conditions, I think, for peace and prosperity throughout the region. I don't think I don't want to minimize for a second the complexities of the situation on the ground. The borders are extremely complicated, and I think there's no issue that arouses kind of emotions and tensions more than the question of land and borders. And so we are certainly willing to do what we can in terms of our partnership with these countries to support a peaceful resolution to the issue. We also think that the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe can play a very useful role here. I know the UN has also offered their assistance. And so hopefully going forward, we will be able to avoid further escalation and further casualties. Back to you, Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Okay, Jennifer, what has been the reaction to the clashes from Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Russia?
Well, this is sort of, I think, where there's been a bit of a surprise that there hasn't been a much stronger reaction from other countries in the region. The Russian Foreign Ministry has called on all sides to find, to not escalate, and they said that they're willing to offer political and diplomatic support. This past weekend, Tajik President Rahmon was in Moscow. That was a long planned visit. And most of the press that I've seen from that visit has focused on the Tajik-Afghan border. And I think it's something really important to remember as we talk about escalation here. What's significant about this conflict is this is the first intrastate conflict in post-1991 Central Asia. This is why this is a big deal, that this is an intrastate conflict between 2 military forces. Of course, it started, with this at the grassroots level, but escalated quite quickly. So I do think that this is why there's such a reason that so many people are concerned about this, about what kind of precedent this takes, and why. So Russia has, said that, it help both sides find a resolution to the conflict. I think Russia is very concerned about this being a distraction from the U.S. military withdrawal on the Tajik-Afghan border, and I would suggest that this is where Tajikistan has had its most pressing concerns in recent years. Kazakhstan has said that it would offer to mediate. The president of Kazakhstan called on all sides to respect a ceasefire. Same thing from Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan has really taken this as an opportunity to sort of claim its sort of regional leadership status. And one of the president's advisors, Kamil Alamjanov, he's not a presidential advisor, but he's the person who chairs a public fund for media development, really took credit for this in public and said that President Mirziyoyev of Uzbekistan had mediated this dispute between the two presidents. I'm not sure if that's the case or not, but it definitely sees itself as a regional mediator and is really coming out offering assistance to both sides. I mean, the OSCE and the EU have both offered, have called on all sides to respect a ceasefire, but we really haven't seen a lot of the international community take a large role in mediating this conflict. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. And I'm curious to hear from the other panelists about their views of Russia in all of this as well.
Okay, thank you. Akile, there has been some concern in the West that Kyrgyzstan is heading in a more authoritarian direction. For example, we could point to the peculiar treatment of Andrew Cutchins, the American Eurasian expert, well known and favorably known in Washington, who's been the president of the American University of Central Asia, who has been summoned by the police. What is the role, in your judgment, if any, of domestic politics in Kyrgyzstan on the border issue?
Thank you very much for the question. Actually, so I want to start with the little discourse, to this attacks against AUCA in Kyrgyzstan. Actually, it started out maybe since 2010 in my observation. The AUCA, we have to understand that the AUCA is kind of a symbol of democracy, liberalism in Kyrgyzstan, not just in Kyrgyzstan, but for the whole Central Asia. And not just AUCA got under the heavy attack of different nationalist groups here in Kyrgyzstan, and that actually have their representation in parliament and in the government. But also, I want to admit that along with the heavy attack, we have pretty strong Kyrgyz civil society that actually has been standing with AUCA during the whole period of dark days of these attacks. So just last year we had the attack of using the LGBTQ community of AUCA, and maybe you've heard about that. So and then it's just one of the examples that pops up in my mind, but there've been pretty many, and the newspapers and the media here has been using that a lot. And every single time when we as civil activists, we observe that, we perceive it with great concern, and we don't get in silence. We immediately go viral with the social campaign in social media that actually highlights how important AUCA is for our country. Another thing to point out is that by the if you see the students list, I mean the majority of them, they come from the mostly, I would say, not just rich families, but families that where the parents work in the government. So even the AUCA students, they themselves claim that, even though we got so much attack from the pro-government groups, we still, the majority of us come from those families. So it's an irony of Kyrgyz reality here, and at the same time, the recent I wouldn't say just conflict, but the recent event with Andrew Cutchins, actually it was huge for us, for Kyrgyz civil society. We immediately, actually, again, we said to our Kyrgyz civil society that we are not with that. We stand with the UCA. And the thing that the government got in under the heavy, criticism, not just from the Kyrgyz civil society, but from the political groups that criticize the government for this treatments against AUCA and AUCA people. And one thing I want to point out is that the political treatment of the border conflicts here in Kyrgyzstan is very interesting and complex. It's not that as in neighbor countries, as in Uzbekistan or Tajikistan, where the hierarchy of the power is pretty strict. so that it's pretty authoritarian, and all of the issues, including the border conflicts, they've been resolved by the leaders. Here in Kyrgyzstan, recently with the new leadership of Sadir Japarov and Tashev, we've had many complex issues emerged immediately, because Sadir Japarov, he started out with his visit to Uzbekistan, where with the president, Mr. Mirziyoyev, he was in handshake saying that all of the border disputes with Uzbekistan are now over. And then the Kyrgyz civil society questioned it, like not knowing what is over, like what is this deal about. And then Tashev went down to the south saying, okay, so we are giving one territory in exchange to another territory, which actually brought so much criticism, not just from the civil society as we perceive to know as the NGOs or a UCA. No, that were just the common people on the border side that actually went out to those border lines. They put the yurts, and they claim that they are not, they don't agree with these measures. And this actually brought down Tashev. He actually had to come down to the south and to take down those deals with Uzbekistan. So when it comes to the borders with Tajikistan, it's very complex now for the new leadership to treat it in the way that it's mutually beneficial. Because what we see now from the document signed between two governments recently after the tragic events, we see that the Kyrgyz people are not pretty happy with those measures, and that again challenges the Kyrgyz leadership to come back to Kyrgyzstan and to actually give a solid response to those questioning how beneficial that measures were. So this is again this is the way of how the border conflicts or any issues in Kyrgyzstan are being treated. And it looks like the authoritarian style of resolving any conflict here in Kyrgyzstan, as it could be possible in neighboring countries like in Tajikistan or Uzbekistan, it's never possible here. People will go out to the streets, people will voice up their disagreements, and people from the recent events in Karasu and Uzgun here in Kyrgyzstan, we see that people are very decisive in making sure their interests are well respected. Thank you.
Anahita, same question for you. But domestic politics in Tajikistan, is that a complicating factor? And domestic politics need not just be civil society, but also the dynamics among the elites.
Yeah, it is a good question, because we should remember before this conflict we had a lot of discussions about I think our main problem is migration to Russia. And I just noticed before this conflict we had a lot of discussions about migration to Russia, but the problem was because of COVID, it was a difficult year for especially Tajikistan, because our GDP depends on remittances. And I saw like a lot of negative comments on social media, and the tickets were really high. And before this conflict, I remember a lot of discussions, and somehow what happened to Voruch, and people started to think about Voruch. The other my point about was Tajikistan interested, like the government, to have this conflict? I don't think so, because mostly our men from Tajikistan, they're in Russia, almost like 1 million people are abroad, and I don't think we have strong economy as Kyrgyzstan to have this like a war between two countries. I've heard some people, they were talking about it like it could be, but I don't think so. Also, my last point about Russia, just we should remember, because I don't think Russia needs this headache as well. because Tajikistan now is a chairing this CSTO organization, this collective security treaty organization, and Kyrgyzstan is a member as well. But just before, on April 27, the ministers of defense of CSTO, they were in Dushanbe. And after that, I think it was like very unexpected for Russia as well to have such a conflict, because now China, Russia, they are more focusing on Afghanistan. We know after the US troops, they're leaving, they left almost. And then that's why I think that Russia is more concerned about the southern borders, and the regional key players like Russia, China, they're not interested to have another hot conflict in this region.
Thank you. George, what needs to be done to restore better relations between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan? Anything on the civil society side also I think would be of interest.
It's a great question. I'm not sure that I have the right solution for the civil society side, but I can say that the flurry of diplomatic activity
Please.
that's happened has been very good and very instant from many different sides. Like Deputy Assistant Secretary Hennick said, he gave several examples. The question is, for me, how are we going to prevent similar things like this from happening over the longer term? And
Please.
the usual solution that you get and that we have been getting is that we just need to delimit the border. But the truth is that even delimited borders can suffer from escalation, pretty major escalation, especially when people are still side by side, even if you have some sort of ditch or wall built. So for me, the question becomes about monitoring more, where you're going to keep these common resources, especially like water sharing facilities, canals, and so on, and distribution points. You need much stronger monitoring agreements. You need better resources for their upkeep. And at the same time, border management, which is the very problem here, is also a contributing factor, because one of the things that's happened over the years is that there's been a lot of arms smuggling across borders. So Jennifer mentioned the hunting rifles that people are using, but now there's like a general flow of weapons through the area, and people are keeping weapons not for any sort of extremist purposes, but for protection and precisely for things like this. So now it's not just rock throwing. People grab a weapon and run for the border. So the question is, what can you do if you can't necessarily not only definitively delimit the border, but entirely bring down tensions? And one thing I would suggest, and I'm a little bit of an outlier here, is the following. When I first started doing research on border management in the area many years ago, I was a really big fan of sharing gray zones, sharing water resources, sharing pastures, and so on, doing much more cross-border work. I've soured on that a little bit. And one of the reasons I've soured on it is not because I don't like it. I would love to live in a society where people are fundamentally better at sharing things with their neighbors, and particularly neighbors that are different than them. But I think that one of the things that we've missed is that the international community that remains and works in Central Asia tends to do a lot of projects that are all about cross-border work, sharing resources, etc. But what people are increasingly telling us in parts of the Ferghana Valley is that they no longer want to look across the border. They want to divide. They want to have their own resources. So I think we need to do, first of all, like a fundamental survey of the border region and find out where people are still willing to try to live neighborly and to share resources across the border, and where they have just given up on that, and where they want their own resources, their own parallel resources. So I think over the short term, a mapping project like that would be a really good step towards coming up with longer term solutions, because the longer we wait and the longer the border isn't delimited and the longer nationalism stays around, we're going to have events like this again. Thank you.
Thank you. Jonathan, the last question for me is for you. We've already talked a little about Russia. We've also mentioned China. Has the U.S. had a conversation with Moscow, or for that matter, Beijing, on this?
So, of course, we have regular contacts with Moscow and Beijing. We've not spoken specifically about this particular conflict, um, which isn't to say we're not willing to. I mean, I think our overriding interest here is to, again, de-escalate, support peace and stability, the ability of people to return home and rebuild. If I could just take advantage of having the floor, maybe to
Please.
question, George's comment. I don't disagree that we shouldn't be naively optimistic that we can all join hands and sing kumbaya and everything will be fine. At the same time, I wonder if the trend that he's seeing in the Ferghana Valley of people wanting their own resources fundamentally is a result of a lack of continued economic development and prosperity. I would argue that the real way to go is to ensure, like a rising tide lifts all boats. If we can really create the conditions for real economic growth in the region, the kind of economic growth that'll improve, the day-to-day lives of the people living in the Ferghana Valley, I think they would have less reasons to want to, husband their resources or to see kind of these cross-border issues as somehow disadvantaging them. The reality is there's tremendous potential in Central Asia, both in terms of intra-regional trade and cooperation, as well as, once we are able to effectively, create connectivity between Central Asia and, and the rest of the world, there's enormous potential for growth. And I think with that, we would see a gradual reduction in the kind of tensions that we're seeing here. But I certainly am supportive of any effort by the international community, and the United States would be a willing participant in this, to look at how we can take measures to make sure that these types of conflicts don't recur going forward.
Thank you. Very helpful. All right. First question from our audience, our virtual audience, from Mehmet Aguz Derin. How were the victim support programs, donations, volunteering after the incident on both sides? Akale, if you could provide within 60 seconds an answer to the question from the Kyrgyz side.
Yeah, I would go with numbers. So the Kyrgyz civil society was pretty active, just like last year with the pandemic of COVID-19. So when there was no response from the government, the people actually took an active stand for people. And this time we have raised around 66 million soms, just about like in 2 days. And also the diaspora, so-called, I would say, the Kyrgyz citizens that actually live and study abroad, for instance, in America, our students have raised, and not just students, but also businessmen that have raised around $160,000 to address the needs of the victims. And now the civil society activists right now, they're in Batken these days, and they're actually monitoring the process of distribution, and they're actually helping the local government to use the tools of fair distribution. So this is the first. And the second thing that I would like to note is that we also, this actually tragedy was unlike to others, is that during the June events, if the Kyrgyz government was more reliable on international community, so this time it was just, the people, us. And this is another peculiarity of this conflict from others. Thank you.
Thank you. Anahita, on the Tajik side? Please unmute.
Yeah, sorry. So from our side as well, the civil society, they were active, and I know many people started just travel to the conflict zone now. I think now the government again the government wants to help the victims of this conflict. And also I've heard that the Ministry of Interior now decides to raise all the money, and they want to have one channel because it is because of transparency. So many independent like civic activists, they wanted to help, but now again, as we can see, the government wants to control it. So that's from our side.
Thank you. Okay, we have a question from Mark David Miller. What does this conflict mean for the Kaza 1000 project, which exports electricity from Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan to Afghanistan and Pakistan? Anyone want to take this question up?
I could jump here
Jennifer,
on
go
this
ahead.
one. Yeah, I don't think that means very much for this project. I mean, this project has been in the works for a long time. And I think that there's really an important point to be made here about the difficulty of this conflict in the light of some of the diplomatic efforts that Deputy Assistant Secretary Hennick was speaking about. So the U.S. has been quite involved in Central Asia, and the C5+1 process has gotten these ministries together, you know, working with the U.S. in new ways. And it's unfortunate. I mean, it's unfortunate this conflict emerged, but it came at a very, actually to me, a surprising time, at a time when these governments have been working more closely together, seemingly that more than any point in their recent history. So just, 2 months before this conflict broke out, for the first time, the governors of Ferghana, Batken, and it was Ferghana, Batken, and the in Tajikistan, they met together in Ferghana. This was unprecedented. It was the first time the governors of these states, believe it or not, in the 30 years of this independence, had actually met together. And they talked about trade, and Uzbekistan and Tajikistan officials signed some trade agreements together. So there's real opportunities for sort of positive sum relations to emerge from this. I don't think these projects like CASA 1000 will be on hold. And in fact, there's a real opportunity to show these gains from trade. And just echoing George's comments about delimitation, I don't think border delimitation is the solution to this. I think it's greater integration, greater opportunities for exchange and trade that are going to lessen the influence and the importance of these borders and create opportunities for everybody in this region to spur economic growth.
Jennifer, thank you. In fact, your answer raised the issue of C5+1. We have a question from Anahita Saymidinova, who asks about what role the other regional states might play, Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. We've already heard about Uzbekistan's interest here, but let me put this question a little bit differently. We've seen much greater cooperation regionally since President Mirziyoyev took the helm in Tashkent. Might this issue be something which the upcoming summit of the Central Asian states might address? Jonathan, you want to take a shot at this, or George?
Sure. I welcome the thoughts of others as well. But I think Jennifer put it really well, which is we have seen, I think, incredible degree of cooperation across the region, which is not to say that these countries, I think, are interested in or should be giving up their independence or sovereignty or compromising on things like borders. But I think they're in the area of trade, in the area of kind of, certainly creating kind of infrastructure that facilitates kind of regional cooperation. There's just enormous potential there. And we've, I think, contributed, at least in some small way, to that process through the C5+1 framework. The C5+1, we already have a standing security working group that includes, of course, all 5 countries and the United States. And so we would welcome, if it's in the interests of the governments of Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, to use that forum either to address some of the outstanding issues related to this conflict, or to create the kind of confidence building measures I think that we all agree we need to have going forward. As far as kind of in direct response to your question, Ambassador, I can't speak to what's in the minds of the 5 leaders or what's on their agenda for their next meeting, but I would be very much surprised if they didn't at least address this issue. And I would expect real leadership on the parts of the other countries to urge the presidents of Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan to do everything they possibly can to resolve this issue so that continued cooperation throughout the region can go forward.
We have a question on a different subject, but it's always a very important one for Central Asia, and that's water. It's from Marcia McGraw-Olive, the former World Bank country manager in Central Asia. With all due respect to surveys, the water issue is extremely complex and has not yet risen to the top of the agenda for regional or international leaders. Who might take the lead in bringing the parties to the table to talk about water? George, you're smiling. You want to take this?
Well, it's a great question, and the reason why I smiled is because the UN had tried to take the lead on this
I
through
remember.
UNRCCA in Ashgabat some years back, and they were very gently nudged away by Central Asian leaders who prefer to deal with this on a bilateral basis, and that still kind of remains the way they like to do things, and I think it's hard to say who is going to have a better entry point and that can accomplish more than these bilateral ways that they've talked about water in the area. But I will say that because there are so many cutbacks in foreign aid, you saw what happened in the UK the past few weeks, and that is actually going to also hurt UK programs in Central Asia as well that are going to suffer. Uh, there's going to be a scramble for donors for a lot of UN programs across Central Asia. So I think the easiest way to answer that is whatever organization or government is willing to find an entry point on water sharing and the water issue is also going to have to come up with some really nice carrots in terms of some sort of aid, development aid, because right now all we're seeing are cuts, and so it's hard to know who's going to have that kind of leverage or entry point.
Oh, Jonathan, please.
Yeah, I think George is exactly right. This is an issue of extreme sensitivity, not just for irrigation reasons, but I think, as we all know, water is also very closely tied to the energy industry in the region as well. And US aid has a number of programs that do work in the area of water, and including regional programs that bring kind of the key officials who manage water issues, from across borders together. I'm not suggesting that on a scale, to be able to kind of resolve this problem quickly. But what we found is it's really important to build trust and to recreate those relationships across the borders by the people, who are responsible for these issues. I think some of the real resistance is coming from that Soviet era kind of, top-down approach where, you had, decision makers in Moscow deciding who would get water and who wouldn't and for what purposes. And obviously we're in a very, very different world right now. And the countries of the region, I think have every right to negotiate with their other partners in the region in a way that serves their national interests. But that doesn't mean that there aren't ways, I think, to work across the region to the mutual benefit of all the countries in the region. And certainly we expect to continue to invest in these areas through US aid. But again, and also we're happy to contribute through our contributions to the UN and through OSCE. The key, and this goes back to George's point, is the key is to make sure that whichever mechanism that the countries are most comfortable with is one that is resourced to be able to address this important issue.
Thank you. Okay, Jennifer, you want to jump in?
Oh, yeah, I would just say that I think we're beginning to see sort of a micro-macro divide on some of these issues. Whereas at the micro level, these tensions, people can overcome these tensions locally, but they escalate to the national level. At the national level, you're seeing increasing momentum to solve some of these water problems. So if we look, for example, at Uzbekistan's objections to the Rogun Dam, President Karimov, 10 years ago said he'd go to war, with Tajikistan, this rebel. Uzbekistan has now lifted those objections. So one of the things I've just kept my eye on is just because of Uzbekistan's unique geographical position here, that it touches on all of these countries. Its willingness to participate in this could affect these dynamics for the better. But I think the internal dynamics inside the country will limit its ability to do so. But we'll have to wait and see. But watching those macro dynamics take shape, I think, will be an important thing to watch in the years to come.
Okay, thank you. It's now 1 o'clock. The time is up, but we have one last question. So I'm going to ask all of you this question. You can answer it by saying yes, no, or no comment. And it's a question coming from Michelle Pullman. What are the chances there will be land swaps between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan? Again, yes, no, or no comment. Akile.
So far, no comment.
Thank you. Jonathan?
No comment.
Anahita? I think you said no comment, but you were muted.
I said yes, no comment.
No comment. Jennifer?
I say yes.
Yes, okay. Brave. George, last word.
I say no way.
Okay, thank you all very much for this conversation.
It's
I
a
appreciate
draw.
your discipline on this last question, and we'll be doing more on Central Asia in the months to come.
Thank you.